As Ben said, my name is Michael. I write for RenewEconomy. RenewEconomy was started by our Energize about 10 years ago. It's not just as itself. It's been able to build up that outlet as well as just expanding into our dedicated electric vehicle website that we've driven and lots of off the grid, which focuses on all things like rooftop solar and residential battery storage. Basically, the growth of the new economy has been driven by the interest in the energy transition. So we cover climate change, we cover electric vehicles, clean energy, politics and policy, and we basically just sustain by the fact that there's a lot of people interested in that. We've been able to grow over the years. I've been there for just kind of 3 years. And we've got a free daily newsletter as well, so you get a nice summary of everything we write each day if you want to sign up. So I'm just going to give a quite high-level discussion and provide some insights and observations. Obviously, I work as a journalist, so I'm not from a research background, but we do get a lot of information. We're constantly looking at how the market is changing. And this sort of is a model of how the electricity market sort of started. So we started with a really significantly centralized system. We had the traditional baseload thermal generators that were built, clustered around coal mines or gas resources. We've got our big transmission lines which take that electricity from somewhere like Trove or the Hunter Valley or the Hunter region and take that to the population centres. And then we have the distribution networks that feed that electricity to homes and businesses. And for a long time, that had been a one-way flow of electricity, right, from power stations to the homes. And that's how our system has been built, that's how our rules have been written. And that's basically the first sort of 100 or so years of electricity use in Australia. We're going through quite a significant change in that energy market. And I see there being two big drivers of that change. One is the fuel source transition, which is the changing ways in which we generate and store and use our electricity. We've got that being driven by sort of three sub areas, being the bulk of our traditional baseload generators starting to reach retirement age. We've got the growing urgency for our energy systems to decarbonise. So our electricity system is probably our single largest contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change obviously becoming a really significant issue. And we've got the emergence of low-cost, low-emission sources of energy and energy storage products as well. So that's where that change is starting to come through. We're also having a really significant change around the way we interact with our energy use. So, and this is around our ability to collect and to analyse data around our energy use and the way that we produce and distribute electricity. And that's a really significant thing in and of itself. Our energy system is built on these generators that, and our energy use was built around not really wanting that real-time or needing that real-time analysis of our energy use. If you think about some of the old energy meters that we used to have in our homes, originally we had old spindle meters, and the electricity retailer literally had to send someone around to your house to read how much electricity you used for that quarter or for the 6-month period. That is changing completely. We can monitor our energy use in real time and collate and analyse that data really significantly. So breaking down some of those issues into more detail. So this is what it looks like in terms of our traditional baseload generators starting to exit the system. These are projections produced by the Australian Energy Market Operator around the predicted exit of our coal-fired generator fleet from our energy markets. They've modelled a few different scenarios because They've got their baseline scenario, which is what energy companies said that they're going to do with their coal-fired power stations. But AEMO has basically said, we don't think that's what's actually going to happen. We think quite possibly things are going to happen a lot faster than that. And this was released late last year. It's already out of date because in the last week we've just had our two largest energy companies announce that they're closing some of their coal-fired plants earlier than they had originally said. AGL sort of made small changes, bringing forward the closure of some of their coal-fired power plants by a few years. Origin yesterday made quite a significant announcement that they were going to close Aurora Power Station 7 years earlier than they thought they were going to, and that's within the next 3 years. So not only is this happening, but this is happening. This is going to happen faster than we think it's going to happen, if that makes sense. Talking about climate change, and this is a chart that's produced by the International Energy Agency. This is what their sort of pathway to zero net emissions in our energy sector looks like. This covers all energy use, so I think the light blue line is electricity, but it covers transport and industry and energy use in buildings. Their prediction for us to get to zero net emissions in 2050 requires a whole bunch of changes throughout the energy system. It requires changes in the way that we generate and produce electricity. It requires changes in the way that we use electricity by using energy by replacing fuel use for transport or thermal energy use in industry towards things like electricity, which we can then replace with renewable energy sources. So this is putting another pressure, another impetus, not only around power stations to close earlier than we thought, but there's a real climate change imperative for that to happen as well. If we're replacing, we need to take those energy sources out of our energy system. We then need to think about what we're going to replace them with. And thankfully, this is a chart that's produced by the CSIRO for their general cost assessment. The details are probably a bit hard to see on there, but basically this is talking about the levelized cost of different generation sources. These lines across the right, that are the lowest lines, are wind, PV, and there's ones across the far right-hand side are renewable energy sources backed up by different levels of storage. As you can see, those energy sources are significantly cheaper than basically any other alternative. Those alternatives include black coal, brown coal, gas, and small nuclear reactors. So if we're looking at replacing an aging polluting energy system, that we're able to do that and reduce our cost of energy by shifting to renewables. That's a really good outcome for us. We're already seeing this change starting to happen. So this is going back to 1999. This is the national electricity market. We have coal down the bottom, we've got some gas, and then we've got some hydro. And then we've got wind and solar starting to come into the market. So we really started to see that happen around 2010. And as those coal and fossil fuel generators are in the market, we're having our renewables come and replace them. So this transition is already well underway. As you can see, our electricity use is actually increasing. So we're not sort of stopping, we're not going through a process where we're stopping to use our electricity. We do You see a lot of commentary around people saying we can go back to the dark age because we're going to have to stop using electricity because wind and solar is not going to be able to power it. But actually, we are switching to renewables, but we're increasing our energy use at the same time. So we're not our actual ability to do things and to have our economy powered by energy is still continuing. One thing that is happening, so this is what the transition and this change in our energy use looks like on a shorter period of time. So that previous slide looked at the year-by-year change. This is what our energy use looks like on a day-to-day level. So the chart on the left is Australian electricity use over the last 3 days or so. And what we can see is during the middle of the day, we have a lot of sunlight, and solar is starting to really become a major source of our energy. Or at least our electricity consumption. And particularly now, we're in the middle of the summer, we have periods in Australia where solar is the largest source of electricity in Australia. That's not like that all the time, but it is there during when we have solar available. And what that is doing is it's really squeezing the market share for coal and gas. And coal generators in particular, this is an issue because they're, going back to our sort of first slide, they've been designed to run a baseload system that has required baseload generation, that they assume that they can run all the time, and then finding that they're going to have to sort of act like a more flexible generator because they have to respond to solar coming in during the middle of the day, and a lot of them are not able to actually respond in that way. The chart on the left was included in Origin Energy's market update yesterday, and what this highlights is the changing price of electricity throughout a 24-hour period. So this is sort of their prediction for 3 different periods: 2022, 2025, and 2030. And what they see is a real reduction in electricity prices and wholesale electricity prices in the middle of the day when solar is at its peak. And for them, that's problematic because if they're trying to operate a power station like Aurora, they can't turn it off during the day. They're then having to cut these really low prices. And what they said is ideally what they could do is replace Aurora with a battery. So the battery can charge in the middle of the day when prices are low, and then make the energy available again at the end of the day or in the early morning when prices are high. They didn't include the scale on this chart, but that price difference is about $30 to $35 a megawatt hour. So there's a real, we call it arbitrage opportunity for those flexible technologies like battery storage to come in. So not only are we switching to renewables, but our market is becoming one that is more conducive to flexible technologies like battery storage to come on and be financially viable. Yeah.
So Graham, is any part of that graph in negative territory?
No, not at the moment. So it's a good question. So the question was, is any of the graph in negative territory? Not yet. I had a good look at it today to give an idea of where that scale is. The bottom of this chart is at about sort of $55 to $60 a megawatt hour. The top is about sort of $100 a megawatt hour. So we're not down to negative territory yet, but it's a good question because as the market share for solar grows, we do get the potential where we have a glut of solar in the middle of the day, and that's something that market operators are looking at the moment. The third thing I mentioned was around, or second the key driver was around digitalization of energy systems. When I convinced my parents to get solar on their roof in 2010, we had this little device on the left, or one similar to that, which allowed them to read how much their solar panels are putting out from the land rooms. They didn't have to go out and look at the meter or the inverter. But that wasn't connected to the internet. There's a collected data, but it was a pretty basic system. We now have the systems on the right. There's a reposit box, switch-in box, and a watt watches box. These will monitor the output of the solar panels, the rate of the status of charge in your battery system, your household consumption. They're grid connected, and then we'll feed that data to a centralized system or to apps so that you can watch what is happening in your system at real time. So we have much better ability to collect and analyze that data in real time. What all this change has meant is that rather than having that centralized energy system where electricity flows in one direction and we have power stations located in a single location, we have now a decentralized energy system that is significantly more interconnected, where we have batteries and solar, and community solar and community batteries that are all part of an energy system that is becoming more complex. but also becoming more possible to optimize and control for individual people or for communities. And this is really because of the types of technology that we're now deploying. So if you think about what solar is, fundamentally, solar power, we get our solar power from solar panels. Fundamental unit of solar is the solar panel, and if we install it on the roof or we install it in a solar farm, it's the same technology. The only difference is in a solar farm, you just put more of it. It's still the same solar panels that are getting deployed, which means it's really easy for us to work on the optimization of the manufacturing of these panels, and allows us to deploy at different scales. So you can put it on a home, you can put it in a community solar farm or a utility scale solar farm. Batteries are basically the same. So fundamental unit of a battery system is something that looks like a AA battery. Whether it's a Tesla Powerwall or a Tesla big battery, it's effectively the same technology, you're just building more of it. So in these containers in the commercial large-scale solar battery project, it's still the same kind of like AA units, you just put a lot of them in there. The same thing can't be said for thermal generation. So you can have a big coal-fired power station, but you can't have rooftop coal-fired power stations. You can't have rooftop gas-fired power stations because the technology is not scalable in the same way. And so by switching to different types of technology in terms of the way that they operate has meant that individuals, communities are able to then participate in the energy system in a way that they haven't done so before. We are seeing that uptake happening in Australia. So this is a chart of rooftop solar installations in Australia. We can see that before about 2008, basically rooftop solar was just not possible. If you had rooftop solar before 2008, you went out and doing it because you just really like solar power and paid a lot of money to get it installed. You probably spent more money on the solar panels than you would have ever gotten back in terms of electricity generation. But in 2009, 2010, when climate change has become a real significant issue, governments are going in, putting in quite generous rebates, quite generous feed-in tariffs, and we had a really dramatic increase in rooftop solar installations. We then had what felt like the industry grew really quick. Those rebates, those feed-in tariffs started to get wind back. Also in 2013, we had the federal government switched from the Labor government to a Conservative government, and that did exacerbate the fall quite dramatically. So we sort of had a sort of reconciliation in terms of the solar industry, but the cost of solar continued to fall. The issue of climate change became more real. People's electricity prices continued to increase, and we're now back at levels where people are installing solar at a rate comparable to what they were doing when they got rebates and feed-in tariffs, even though those don't exist anymore. So the industry's taking that off again. But there are groups of people who are missing out on being able to take advantage of that switch to solar and switch to battery storage. There are key demographics, there's some structural reasons that are able to do it as easily as other households. Examples being low-income households who might have the spare capital to be able to invest in a rooftop solar system. Renters are a key market. Around a third of Australians are renting their homes by not having that ownership and not necessarily having that long-term tenure within a house. They're effectively being locked out of the rooftop solar, being able to buy rooftop solar, as well as for apartment jobs as well, where they might not have necessarily access to the roof space that they might if they were in their own home. We're also seeing, and we've had earlier presentations that have talked about this as well, these issues around regional communities where you might have renewable energy projects going into them, but not necessarily sharing the benefits of those projects. So if you are the regional area, you will have a wind farm going in or a large-scale solar farm going in. But those projects are owned by big corporations. They're the ones getting the main benefits of it. And there is a real difference between, in terms of feeling like you're sharing the benefits, between getting a community grant from a company that is trying to secure their social license to operate in that community by providing community funding or grants, to that community owning a share of that project. And not only just feeling like they're getting grants, but then sharing in the profits and sharing the planning and the operation of that project. There's a real distinction between those two. As well as communities that trying to always remember about those communities that have long been dependent on those industries that are now being sort of phased out. So if you've got big communities like Beechworth Road, who have basically been built and clustered around coal as their main source of income, you kind of have to think about what's going to happen to those communities if we close the power stations. But all these can be opportunities for community energy projects. I think that's the good story that's here. Particularly at that top group and these regional communities being able to share the ownership of projects. If you don't have the ability to put solar on your own home, having the opportunity to participate in a community energy project is a really positive alternative that's there. And so being able to extend those benefits to the other presentations touch in more detail, but those models of community ownership that are there. The team at the Institute of Futures at UTS developed this idea of solar gardens. If you think about it as like a community garden that you might have in a community where you have people growing vegetables or growing plants in a community lot as opposed to their own backyard, you can apply the same idea to solar or battery storage projects. You might have systems where you have a cooperative ownership model where you do bring the community together. The community all buys shares in the project and gets the project up that way. Or you have various shareholder models which I think are less as community driven, but you have say project developers or the bigger companies coming in and saying, we will build a solar farm, we want to build a wind farm in your community, but we'll provide you an opportunity to buy a share of that project in whatever way. There's also, going back to those, the increased digitization and increased being able to analyse our energy use. There's also come an ability for us to participate in virtual power plants or demand response mechanisms where you have systems that are set up to effectively aggregate the output from multiple sort of individual rooftop solar systems or battery storage systems or groups of energy users working as a collective to reduce their energy demand at particular times. So talking about the sort of regulatory environment in which energy projects are working on, so working within, we do have come up against these real struggles where you're trying to do something that's been different or will be done for the first time, but you're encountering these rules and these regulations that were written on the basis of like the outdated, old, centralized energy system. And this has been a real barrier for some types of projects because you're trying to do something for the first time and you come up against this bureaucracy that is really slow, really averse to change, but also real like technical and the expertise within that environment is held by a few sort of people within the large energy companies. And so trying to get reforms so that you can have electricity retailers be able to recognise and credit people for their share in community energy projects, or install battery systems, or have even network companies install battery systems to the benefit of the community for all local residents. It's been a bit of a struggle because the rules have not kept up, the changes to the rules have not kept up with the pace of change to the technology. There's now a pretty significant effort underway to try and effectively overhaul and redesign the energy market to better account for these new technologies that are coming in. That's some of that is just greater recognition of the fact that you have technologies that can be both a source and a load within an electricity system. The main change, the main process that's underway now is this post-2025 electricity review or redesign that's been driven by the Energy Security Board. The Energy Security Board brings together representatives of the three major energy market regulators to have AEMO, who operates the wholesale electricity market, Australian Energy Regulator, which kind of administers the rules, and the Australian Energy Market Commission, which is responsible for changing and reforming those rules. So then post-2025 redesign does include some positive changes that are in there, and some will be positive for community energy projects, and that includes the greater recognition of distributed energy resources and the two main flows of power. So an example that they're reckoning with at the moment is that if you have a battery system that's connected to the market and wants to participate in sort of the wholesale energy market, you have to go through a regulatory process and have separate registrations as both a generator and source of electricity, as well as a load within the market. And that just has duplicating all this work. It costs money to go through both regulations, and then we have to deal with two different sets of regulations depending on the battery is charging or discharging the market. And just we can not have to force people to go through that process. We can just create a new type of market, which is recognised as a energy growth. They're also trying to make it easier for virtual power plants and community scale projects to participate in the wholesale market. And that's a potential benefit because that allows you to have access to those the day-to-day variations in power. So if you've got a system that's set up to take advantage of low electricity prices or high electricity prices, being able to participate in that market can be advantageous for that. There's also increased incentives and recognition for things like demand response services, so that you've got your electricity provider wants to aggregate all of its customers and the reductions in demand that they might be able to provide at a period when electricity demand is really high. They'll be able to better understand how those, better incorporate those in the energy market. So ultimately what they want to get to is a market which recognises all the different components in the new energy system. So, if we get to a fully sort of distributed energy system, will account for rooftop solar, it will account for community solar, community batteries, residential batteries, electric vehicles, and trying to optimise those technologies at different scales. So one challenge has been that, how do you optimise the charging and discharging of the battery? Do you optimise it for the individual user, or do you optimise it for, say, the suburb-wide level? And those things can be different, because if you've got a situation where everyone's coming home at 6 o'clock in the evening and turning on their oven and turning on their air conditioning and plugging their electric vehicle in to charge, you're going to have these great spikes in demand early in the evening. But if you can coordinate that at a suburb level, you can manage that, and you can say, look, well, if you don't actually need your car charged straight away, we'll give you cheaper electricity. You can defer that charging to early in the morning so that your car is fully charged when you need it to go, but you're not charging on peak when you're straight on the market. So basically what we're trying to be able to do is build a system where we can optimise all of those considerations. However, not all of the reforms and not all of the changes that are happening at the moment are to the benefit of rooftop solar or to battery storage projects. We are starting to see some restrictions really start to clamp down on the level of things like big solar that can be exported at particular times, and really giving themselves the power to say that we're going to turn off solar exports at particular times, or we're going to impose charges on households for exporting power at particular times or above particular levels. And this is in response to them not having the capacity to be able to accept that into the grid and trying to effectively send the markets and people to curtail their solar generation. And this is really difficult because you've got a whole bunch of people who want to go out and install solar and the benefits of solar, and now being told actually you can cut back those benefits that you can receive purely because there are so many people trying to do the same thing in a group that can only take so much. But thankfully, this should hopefully only ever be sort of short-term responses, and that when market investment can catch up and technology investments can catch up, that as Tim was talking about earlier, reduce those ceilings on solar exports. So this is ultimately the group of people who are shaping how our electricity rules are moving forward. These are all of our state, territory, federal energy ministers. All of these changes, all these market reforms are going through them. So it is still going to be a pretty political process as well. They have their own constituents that they're thinking about, as well as their own ideologies that they bring through as well. So engagement with these people is always something to consider. This is a little bit out of date, as John Barrow knows something more, but basically this is the same group of people. And on that point, I will point out that we are also moving into election season, and as much as there are reforms going through for the regulators and changes happening in the market, I'd say the upcoming federal election is probably going to have just as much impact on the future of the grid as well. And to give a sense of where we could be going, I'm just going to break down what we've had so far in terms of the policies. So Liberal Party or the coalition put out their net zero plan towards the end of last year. In terms of community energy projects, especially you mentioned community energy projects. So that's they've opted to focus on their preferred technologies and reducing emissions through things like carbon capture and storage, industry, solar carbon. They do have implemented the Power and Communities program, which is a pretty small scale program. They're offering about $68,000 per electorate, so it doesn't actually get that much, but it was a program they did implement, and the government has been providing some support through the Australian Agency in terms of the policy package. There's no specific commitments for community energy. They are quickly following them with their own package. They do mention community energy projects in their policy. Their high-level policy was a commitment to zero emissions by 2050. That plan is heavily reliant on a switch to renewables in the electricity sector, including reaching 2% renewables by 2030. So Labor is backing up change. They've made a commitment to provide funding support for 85, what they call solar banks. But that's the community solar farms based on that solar governance model. They've also got a commitment, $200 million commitment for 400 community action projects. The Greens haven't announced their full policy platform yet, but they have committed to this $1.2 billion solar for all program, which is also focused on community, does include commitments to community energy projects. And there's sort of explicitly mentioned that solar gardens model. They've also looked at providing grants for landlords to install solar on residential properties So it's also breaking up those barriers to solar for particular groups. As we definitely, this is like the one place which is probably more knowledgeable on the benefits of independent MPs than anywhere else. But we do have a very significant group of independent candidates putting their hands up. We obviously have Helen Spiegel and Rebecca Sharkey in the federal parliament already. But as Kathy mentioned, there's almost 24 candidates running the selection. They'll be a pretty significant force. I think the policies that are put forward are also very well focused on supporting the switch to renewables and investment in community projects. I think there's a real significant chance that a group of independents will hold balance of power next federal election. The coalition holds government with a majority of 1 seat. Labor needs to win 8 seats to have a majority in their own right. We've got a cross-match of 7 independents already, even if only a handful of them are elected. They will almost certainly have balance of power and will be in a position to negotiate with any future government about making these sorts of initiatives a condition of support. So something to keep in mind. And with that, I've come to the end of my session, so happy to take questions about any of this.